This is a special day on campus because we're celebrating undergraduate research. And the whole day has been packed with activities, and this is the crowning jewel of it, of course. Today we're talking about artists in the collection who are female, depicting females, women and girls. And we have great women here to engage in conversation with each other and those texts. Sydney Martins is going to lead off with this oil painting by Elizabeth Norris. And then, let's see, then Sky Sherwood will talk about this color lithograph by Hollis Sigler. This is going to be tricky, just shifting around so that you can see what you've come to see. Then Isabel Jenny will talk about this image by Lauren Greenfield. And you have the title, you people telling people the title?
Jessica, 13, orders a non-alcoholic drink at a party, Beverly Hills.
And that's nothing compared to the title for yours, right? It goes all the way around the image.
The title of mine is She Always Thought She Was in Control of Her Body.
Right.
That is.
And then Jackie Delgado will talk about this photograph by Graciela Iturbide.
Yes.
Okay. And we have some other images that we may throw into the conversation, including that gorgeous little image there by a Filipino-American artist, and I put next to it the poem which inspired that image. So you have to take a look at that before you go. So why don't you begin? And we're all nervous. And so we know that you're a very receptive and forgiving audience, and it's going to be really fun. Oh, I should really tell you who these people are. Sydney is president of the Gamma Phi Beta sorority. She was very, very instrumental in the dance marathon this year. She's also taking a class with me, an English 180 class, though she's a chemistry and biology major and a junior, because she loves to read. I hate people like that. I tried to dissuade her from taking the class, but she persisted, and there she is. Isabel Jenny, to Sydney's right, is from New Albany, Ohio. She is graduating. She has a history major. She wrote her thesis on Byzantine iconoclasm. How about that? If you have any questions about Byzantine iconoclasm, that's your person. And what else can I say? She is the 23rd member of her family to attend Valparaiso University. She has 33 brothers and sisters. No, that's not correct. And then, let's see what else I want to say about Isabel. She is a Chi Omega, and she's recently taken a job working at the desk and is now thinking about becoming an art appraiser. I hope that's not a disappointment to her parents who are watching, perhaps. It's going to be a surprise. Finally, Jacqueline Delgado is, not finally. Not finally. Next, Jacqueline Delgado from East Chicago is finishing up a English and secondary ed major. She was teaching today at Hobart High School, working with 8th graders? 6th graders. 6th graders. I was asked if I preferred 6th graders or 8th graders because Sky is working with 8th graders. And I prefer 8th grade boys, not girls. Anyway, Jackie is a member of Sigma Tau Delta, a wonderful designer, a great member of our community. And when I saw those iguanas, I said, those are Jackie's iguanas. Okay. Finally, Sky Sherwood grew up in Hobart. She today was teaching at Ben Franklin Middle School. They have offered her a long-term substitute job, which is this is the first step to fame and fortune, and greatness. And it's great. It's great. Some of you, if you were part of Books and Coffee, both Jackie and Sky were part of that program. And so they're back here, eager to tell you about these paintings and what they see and what they've read. And this was not a semester-long thing. I dragged them in here and said, you have to do this for me. And they did. So I'm going to turn the microphone over to you. Sydney.
All right, hello. Like Professor Ruff said, I'm Sydney. I'd like to preface with I don't have a background in art, really. I don't have a background in art, period. I'll say that. So when he invited me to do this, I was excited and nervous, as I am right now. So we'll begin. So we're talking about VU women, talking about women artists. So the woman who painted this oil painting is Elizabeth Nourse. So I'd like to start by talking a little bit about Elizabeth. So she was born in 1859 in Cincinnati, which is pretty impressive for an artist of her caliber because a lot of artists back in that time didn't come from the U.S., let alone Ohio. So there's that. Anyway, so she grew up in Cincinnati and then attended the McMicken School of Design in Cincinnati from the ages of 14 to 23. That's where she kind of found her passion for art. And she attended with her sister, Louise, who also had a passion for art. And while Louise kind of stuck to wood crafts and stuff of that nature, Elizabeth tried everything. She did sculpturing, Sculpting, yep, and painting, drawing, portraits, kind of everything in that realm. So she really wanted to open herself up to really being a prestigious artist. That was her goal from the beginning. When I started trying to draft a little bit of an idea for where I was going to go with this talk, I said, I'm going to talk about her as a woman, and I'm going to talk about her as an artist, and then I quickly found out that is not a distinction that she ever had. She was an artist from the get-go, and she said, from the beginning, she wanted to be different, she wanted to be original, and she wasn't going to be what they called a Sunday artist, which is what they called a lot of women artists at that time, because they would just paint on Sundays, and that would be kind of what they did. So she graduated from the McMicken School of Design when she was 24, or 22 rather, and then she was offered a position there to teach drawing. And she refused that position. She said, no, I want to learn more about art, and I want to be a prestigious artist, not an instructor. So then her and her sister Louise traveled to Paris, where they attended the Académie Julienne. There's a few French words in my little description today, so you're going to have to bear with me. Anyway, so she stayed there for 3 months, and then after 3 months, the instructors there told her that she needed no more instruction. She was fully taught, and there was nothing more that she could learn. So she left. She was probably pretty pleased. She seems like a confident woman based on what I've heard of, and I'm sure she was satisfied with that. She was like, yep, yeah, I am done. So after that, her and her sister Louise traveled from Europe to Russia to North Africa, and they painted a lot, or she rather painted a lot of realist paintings, so things similar to this nature. She would paint people, specifically a lot of peasants, in everyday activities. She didn't want anything fancy, she wanted people's real lives, and that's what she painted. To make some money, she did some portraits, just to get garner some way to make a living, but primarily she just did these oil paintings of people doing everyday activities, specifically lower class people doing everyday activities. In her time in Africa, she painted a lot of African subjects, and that was something, again, not seen at the time when she was an artist. So ultimately her goal was prestige and to be recognized as an artist, so that's what she tried to do. So her realist painting, La Mer, was one of her most famous paintings. It looks very similar to this. I'll be honest, again, I'm not an artist critique person, but it looks very similar. In fact, I saw it online and I said, there's my painting right there. No, it was not my painting. It was La Mer, which is her most famous painting. So she submitted that to the Paris Salon in 1888, and it was judged by an all-male jury, and that's what made being a woman artist at that time so difficult. It was always men who were judging your art, every single time. So, and she was also an unknown artist. No one recognized her name. Elizabeth Norris didn't mean anything to anybody. So she submitted her painting, La Mer, and it was approved and hung at eye level in the Paris Salon, which is very impressive. So, again, I don't know much about the Paris Salon, but there must be different ways
Well,
to hang
actually,
it.
they would hang this whole wall with paintings.
Mhm.
So if you got to be at eye level, they made a judgment about the quality of your work. It's
Yeah.
like, when you're buying wine, the higher on the shelf, the more the expensive the wine, and if you have to stoop down, it's a cheap wine. Same principle.
Yeah, so that was big. She was eye level, which is, I think, what she wanted all of her life, was just to really be seen. And so she got that in the Paris Salon. So that was kind of her largest accomplishment. She continued to paint hundreds of pieces of art, and they got submitted to various salons, but that was kind of her big breakthrough. I looked at some of her paintings, and some themes that I kind of picked up on were a lot of women and girls, a lot of children, specifically girls, and then a lot of food as well. So I thought that was pretty interesting, resembling some sort of nourishment, the importance of food, the importance of just eating as part of a way to live, and that's very real. I also noticed she does have a lot of women and siblings in her paintings, which I thought could be kind of comparable to her very, very strong relationship with her sister Louise. So, in fact, they lived together until Louise's passing in 1937. Elizabeth came down with breast cancer in 1920. I'll backpedal a little. And she had surgery, and she, made it out, but she was very debilitated. She could barely stand. So she retired from painting in 1921. And then, like I said, her sister Louise passed in 1937, and that was her lifelong companion, and she passed away in 1938. So she never married, she never had kids. She loved art, and that's what she did. And I think that the representation of women and girls in that relationship in all of her paintings, and you see in this one as well, I think is telling to her relationship with her family and her relationship with her sisters. So.
Excellent. I'll say that I put this particular photograph next to it. This is a photograph of a couple things. This is the first painting by a woman to come into the collection. When Julius Sloane's collection of art was given to us by Percy Sloane, he also had a collection of works. So this would be the first woman in the collection. And she was among some of the first of the American artists. She's, I think, a contemporary of Mary Cassatt, who's much better known, but somehow they deal with the same kinds of themes. Cassatt was also not married, and you go to France to become an artist during that era.
Yeah, and in fact, many did compare her to Mary Cassatt, and they would ask her why don't you paint more prestigious people? You can make more money that way. And she said, how can I paint what does not appeal to me? So she didn't care.
Didn't she win an award from Notre Dame?
Yeah, she won a Catholic Commoners Award.
It's called the Latari Award, and it's given to a lay person. And she stayed in France during World War I, when many people came home to avoid that. She stayed and worked with people and worked in relief.
Yeah.
And so she's a first really important Catholic painter too. I think that.
One of 10.
1 of 10.
Yeah.
Children, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Anybody else want to say something about this image before we move on?
I've got a few notes on the image, if I can. And then I'll pass it to Isabel. So kind of the first things that I took off of this painting was the intimacy of it. And it, makes the viewer kind of feel like this isn't for your eyes to see, but at the same time it definitely is. It feels like an intimate moment that you're not meant to be looking at, but you're also welcomed into. And then, you're looking at the mother and the child, and then your eyes move over to the child over there, and you can just see their eye kind of pointing right out of the plane of the painting, kind of like catching you, in that moment. So that was something that I kind of took note of. And I really enjoyed looking at, specifically the hands. I thought they were pretty telling, and in contrast with the migrant mother picture over there, you can kind of see the distress in the hands. versus here is like the care of the spoon and the holding of the cup of tea. So those were things that I kind of took note of.
And these are fairly small. I could walk around with some of them if you need, or afterwards come up and take a really close look. This is one, the Lang photo is one of the best known photos of the Depression era, known as the migrant mother.
I know, so Professor Brauer has been able to take me down to the vault, which is really neat. So this is my first time actually seeing this, because you haven't shown me this yet. And so when I walked in here today, like this afternoon, a thing that kind of caught my eyes, the contrast like that you were talking about, is the contrast of the way the mother's looking at the child and kind of has this like hopeful look in her eyes, in comparison to like the migrant mother who's kind of looking towards like the camera and kind of like towards the future. So that was one thing that like really like caught my eye, and how she's not even like focusing on her children. She's like looking towards the future. So
You've got the mic. Who's next? Oh, Sky.
Hello, everyone. So I'm going to be talking about the artist of this piece and this piece right here, Hollis Sigler. Hollis was born in 1948, and she passed away from breast cancer in 2001. And this struggle with breast cancer is a large part of the way that she approached the creation of her art. I'm going to talk briefly about her identity, and then I'm going to talk predominantly about her pieces, because her pieces speak on who she is and her identity. So Hollis Sigler is loud and proud. She grew up in the late 1940s, and she was openly gay, and she was very loud and proud about her identity. She was a feminist, and she was very involved in the Chicago art community. She was born in our very own Gary, Indiana, and she moved to Chicago to pursue art, and she attended, let me make sure I'm right, the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, as well as the Moore College of Art and Design. After this, she started to delve into her art career, and she is a woman who made the decision to release kind of capsules of her art as opposed to just pieces. So she would release collections. For example, these are from her collection entitled "She Had Always Thought She Had Control of Her Body." So she would release collections of art that spoke on what she was dealing with in her life at that time. She tried to encapsulate the emotions, the angers, the frustrations and things of womanhood, of being expected to be a mother and just get married off. She was very open about her struggles with being a gay woman in America, and later into her life, as she was diagnosed with breast cancer, she released a breast cancer journal with pieces that specifically embodied the things that she dealt with as she went through treatment into her late life. So looking at these two pieces right here, I just want to point out that this kind of has this very serene, beautiful aura about it based on the colors. But when you look deeper, you see that there is some items that are drowning, and there's some fire in the background. And this is a symbolic choice that is believed that Sigler chose to take domestic items like a TV or a chair to represent the way that women are forced into domestic womanhood and expected to just exist within a household, be a home care person, take care of the home. So here you see there is a television set and a chair that is drowning. And she made a lot of choices that were symbolic in her art to very discreetly represent her anger towards the way that women are treated and the expectations of women. You also see women's clothing garments that are tattered and hung from a tree. And this is symbolic of the way that women are expected to dress. And she was very loud and proud and did not meet the standard of how women were meant to dress, how women were meant to speak. And that is truly her identity. And then looking at this piece over here, which is one of my personal favorites, going around this blanket right here.
Now this is a different artist. That's Faith Ringgold.
Oh, okay. Well, I was under the impression that these were both the same artist. Okay, well,
All right.
well, we see here that this still deems true. And she did have breast cancer, and throughout her life, as she neared her death, in the release of her breast cancer journal, there are a lot of pieces where she would embed messages about her life and embed messages about the struggles that she faced. And you very clearly see that here. And as she neared her death, she decided to pursue teaching. She taught at the college, Columbia Art College, and she pursued teaching art and design there. So that's how she decided to spend her late years before she was overtaken by her illness and very unfortunately passed away in 2001. But if you are interested in this artist, looking into her journal, her breast cancer journal, it's beautiful. There is notes directly from her, lots of pieces that are related to her experience with this, and overall she's just an incredible artist, and I think that she deserves to be commemorated and remembered for her abilities.
She liked Faith Ringgold, and this work by Leslie Dill, there's a lot of language, and I can read it to you what it says. Yeah. Okay. As the title is written across here, she had always thought she was in control of her body. And then she's written all the way around the image. She had always thought she was in control of her body. When she was diagnosed with breast cancer, she felt betrayed by her body. It was her body letting her down. Then she realized her control had been an illusion. And then on the very top, there's a little flag, and which says, to have power is to realize our lack of control. I think it's kind of amazing that she chose a flood to represent that sort of loss of control. I'm lucky to have never had to suffer through a flood, but it's just a kind of relentless situation.
And with that, something that you see as a common trend in Sigler's work is she does take a focus towards natural disaster to represent the things that she dealt with in her treatment. So here we see this flood that's represented, but she very often would show barren rooms with brightly colored walls with chars and burns around the walls that are completely empty. And choices like this were to demonstrate the way that she felt inside and how she felt very alone and empty and how this disease was taking over her body. So here she did the flood, fires, and a lot of times she would show tornadoes in just normal landscapes, suburban landscapes. And so she would choose to blend domestic womanhood and suburbia and how that's kind of the expectation of the American dream for women with these natural disasters to speak on both feminine identity, feminism, and then cancer.
Which is a natural disaster.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, thank you.
So my piece is by Lauren Greenfield, and so this piece was one of the first pieces that kind of made me take a second look, because when you glance at this photograph, especially up close, you take it to be someone who is around college age.
No, maybe the other way, so that you, there, sorry.
Around college age, so 18 to 22. But in reality, this girl is 13 years old, and so we'll get back to why that's important. So Lauren Greenfield, she's a documentary photographer and filmmaker. So she kind of emphasizes on a popular form of photography that captures either historical events or everyday life in like chronological order. So in the 90s, she was very influenced by the portrayal of youth and how the youth was kind of saturated by the media and how that influenced a lot of, especially girls, to grow up faster than what they should be doing. She's a filmmaker, and so a lot of her work around films do kind of go with like this painting. So if you guys remember the Super Bowl commercial, Like a Girl, and it's basically the commercial that kind of asks girls around 15 to 18 to throw a ball. Do we all remember that? And so they ask them to throw a ball like a girl, and they all ultimately throw it very pathetically. They don't both throw it far, and so Lauren Greenfield asked them in the commercial why they did that. And so that's what they're taught by the media of how to act in a sports setting or any setting, is to be kind of looked at or kind of present themselves as weaker or less than like men in sports. So, and then she asks women from, girls from the age of 4 to 10 to throw a ball, and they throw it. They throw it as far as they can, as hard as they can, and it's a really beautiful piece. So when she asked girls to throw and why they threw it, they said, because you asked me to throw it and I just threw the ball. And then it kind of goes back to the girls who are about 15 to 18, and she asks them to rethrow it. And so all these girls rethrow it, and she goes, that's how you should present yourself to the world. So it's very uplifting and it's very kind of motivating. So going back to this piece, so it's a long title. So it's called Jessica, 13, orders a non-alcoholic drink at a party, Beverly Hills. So this was captured in 1995, and it's of a young girl, Jessica, pictured here, ordering a non-alcoholic drink. And so there's an emphasis on the photo, so right away you see the drink right here, it's red, and then it kind of pans over to alcoholic drinks, and then a neon sign in the back. And so this is a part of the Fast Forward series. So the Fast Forward series is about kind of the youth of the 90s, especially in Los Angeles. And Los Angeles at that time was known as one of the saturated media centers, and still is known as that. And so she wanted to capture how the youth acted at this point. And so the youth that she captured were girls and boys around the ages of 11, 13 at bar and bat mitzvahs. And at bar and bat mitzvahs, they are basically Jewish girls and boys becoming adults within the Jewish faith. So she really wanted to emphasize how this theme of a loss of innocence is captured at these parties, and how these girls especially are kind of influenced by the media that they're subjected to. So in the 90s, it was magazines such as Vogue, 17, and all the products that were kind of pushed towards women, the emphasis on women, so women our age, on the products that they should be using. So makeup products that we all use now were being geared towards, which they didn't realize, to girls of 13. And so how it kind of influenced girls of that age to wear the makeup and kind of act older and kind of present themselves as adults. And then she kind of wanted to focus on how it affects them, especially the girls. And then, so for me, it kind of relates back to the way we grew up. So we grew up in the brink of social media. And with social media, especially today, we can all relate to it, we are given trends of how we're supposed to be acting, of what we're supposed to be wearing, what we're supposed to be doing, and stuff like that. So there is kind of this loss of innocence, especially in today's youth, for not having it. So, yeah.
We've been talking about an image that Nina Crossfield talked about that you can see right over in the photo gallery of young, what's her, Kayla?
It's Kayla Cowan.
Kayla Collins is 11.
Mm-hmm.
And she doesn't look 11 either, perhaps, but it has to do with where she lives and how she's lived. At least that's how I speculate about it. But, is there something else?
Oh, no, I was going to ask that.
Yeah.
So Kayla Cowan, so the art piece over there, you can take a look after the talk. She's kind of representing, if we all know what the Birmingham bombing is. So this artist wanted to kind of represent one of the bombing victims who was at the age of 11. And then he wanted to kind of depict the pain and kind of how she had to grow up knowing the pain of what happened to her experiences, which is in contrast to Jessica, who had to grow up faster based off the media and what the media was telling her.
Yes. Did we already clap? Now, Jackie Delgado, talking about Senora.
Yes. Well, yeah. All right. So this is also a photograph, and this one is actually titled Nuestra Señora de las Iguanas, which is just Our Lady of the Iguanas. And there is an alternative name to this piece, and we'll get to the history behind it and the importance of it. But this is an indigenous Zapotec woman from Mexico named Zobeda Diaz. and so she was photographed in a city called Uchitan, okay, in Oaxaca, Mexico. So,
Jackie, sir. Just a
oh, sorry.
Yeah,
Okay. This was taken by photographer Graciela Iturbide, and she was born in Mexico City. And at first she was not planning to be a photographer. She had actually grown up wanting to be a writer. But in Mexico, there's a lot of cultural norms with what women are expected to do, kind of going off of what we've talked about already with some of the artists up here today. But she was basically just expected to go into motherhood. So she, at 23, got married. She had about 3 kids. One of them passed away in 1970, and that became a big focus point for a lot of her art. But again, originally wanting to be a writer, when she got divorced eventually, she went to school she wanted to be a filmographer. And at the university that she was at, there was another big artist or photographer named Manuel Alvarez Bravo, who was really renowned. Everyone really knew him, and he was a big source of inspiration for her. So he was teaching a still life photography class at the university, and she decided to join. I think ended up being one of the only people there, and then to her luck, she became his apprentice. So really got into photography. She has mentioned multiple times in many interviews that he really taught her a new way of seeing life and of seeing the culture that she was living in. So in 1979, she was invited by another artist, Francisco Toledo, to photograph these people in the city of Uchitan, Oaxaca, Mexico. And what is really special about the city is that unlike most cities in Mexico, this is a matriarchal city. And so the society and the community there is more matriarchal than what is even expected, even now in Mexican culture. And I think it really comes through in this art. So again, this is a woman named Zobeida, and she had actually come across Zobeida at one of the markets in Uchitan. And the women there, they run the markets, the men go work, and they give the money to the women, and I'm like, okay, cool, right? So at the markets, the women primarily run the markets, they are like the business people, and she had seen Zobeida walking by with a basket full of iguanas on her head. And so the iguanas have a significance that we'll get to, but this is very common for the people of Uchitan, Oaxaca. Especially the women, they'll walk around with big baskets of whatever they're selling, and they'll walk around with it on their head. And so she, Graciela, commented that when she saw Zobeida walking by in the market, she just had like a burst of inspiration. She was like, put those iguanas back on your head. Like, I need to take a picture right now. And she took about 12 photos, and she said that this was the one that really spoke to her because the iguanas posed perfectly as if they were like a crown on her head. So I had seen, she also puts on display sometimes with this work, kind of like, I kind of would call them like bloopers, like the other pictures that were taken, and kind of seeing Zobeida in this pose, she's very prideful, it's like pride oozing out of her, this independent woman who just is full of dignity. And seeing the photos, like the bloopers that didn't make the cut, and she's laughing, and you can feel the joy just coming off of her too. And so that was really nice to see, kind of paired with this work. This was also a part of a collection of multiple photos, just titled Graciela Iturbide Uchitan. And so she took photos of multiple women there, of celebrations that they had, of like little kids with like chickens, and just really celebrating the culture. Graciela herself is like world renowned. She has been described as one of the most important and influential Latin American photographers of the past 4 decades. She has been considered one of the greatest contemporary photographers of Mexico and of all Latin America. So she is pretty well known. So talked a little bit about the Uchitan culture. In this photograph, so the iguanas. Some of you might be thinking, like, why iguanas? You know, it's a little bit of a weird thing, I guess. Not the most common choice. But iguanas actually have a really deep cultural and religious significance in Uchitan. So the iguanas, she was preparing them to go sell them at the market because they actually eat iguanas during their Holy Week in Uchitan. So it goes back to the indigenous culture that lived in that community, that still practices in that community. And centuries ago, the iguana meat was actually a regular part of the diet in Tehuantepec, which is like nearby. But now it's considered to only be eaten, or ate, during the Holy Week. And they actually have an entire ritual and a process of going about killing the iguana, so they do it in the church, which I thought was really, really interesting, and kind of going back to that religious significance of it. And so the iguanas here just are a sense of pride, a sense of that culture, a sense of that religion that is just really prevalent in the community. But I don't know if you can see, but the iguanas are kind of positioned in a way that looks like a crown on her head. So at first when I read the title's written at the bottom, so it says Nuestra Señora, but it's written in Graciela's script, I'm assuming, correct? Okay. Graciela's handwriting, and so I thought it said Nuestra Reina, which is our queen. And so when I was looking it up, it kept saying Señora, 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 which is just a more formal way of saying like woman. But I think that queen would still fit here because she has that sense of dignity, she has that sense of pride, and then the iguanas are kind of like a crown on her head. And it's interesting that Graciela would have photographed something like this with that cultural and religious significance, because Graciela herself is actually atheist. Oh, sorry. Graciela herself is actually a practicing atheist. So she herself has been asked, because a lot of her photographs are focusing more on like the culture of the people and the religion aspect. So she's been asked about the different rituals and symbols. And so when I saw this, kind of thinking about, why is there a religious significance, last semester I took a class called Christianity and the Arts. And so when I was looking at this, I thought that this could be considered a modern iteration of maybe La Virgen de Guadalupe, which is just the Virgin Mary. And I thought that that was a really interesting standpoint to kind of look at it. Like, this is just a common woman, but still tying in with the culture of Mexico. It can be seen as like the Virgin Mary with the crown on her head, and especially with the pride oozing out of her. But going back to what Iturbide has said about why she uses religion in her artwork, she says, even if we renounce our upbringing, it's always a part of our baggage, and it accompanies us wherever we go. So again, she grew up in Mexico City. Her family was very Catholic, which is normal in Mexico and in Mexican culture. She have a really strong tie to the church, and even though she's atheist now, she says that it's still something that is a big part of her life, and she can't renounce it completely. So I just thought that was interesting that she's still photographing things that have that religious significance, even though her herself might not believe in religion.
Okay, so now we got some time for questions. Yes?
Sky?
Yes.
On Ziegler's, did you say when she was born?
She was born in, let me fact check, 1948.
Okay, and then she was almost 53 when she died?
Yes.
So she was fairly young then?
Yeah, she was
when
very
she was
young.
diagnosed with breast cancer.
She was diagnosed, I believe, in her early 40s, and she went through treatment for a long time, and it really started to overtake her. It was a very hard illness.
Had she been doing painting before that?
Yes, she started painting at a young age. She pursued it in college, and she was born ready to be an artist. That was her true identity. And as you can kind of see, one thing that I think is interesting too, her art kind of takes a childlike approach. And I don't know if that was intentional, but I think that that's something that's interesting because it kind of draws on this idea of how women have to grow up really fast. There's a lot of responsibilities that are placed on women that, maybe should not be at the age, especially nowadays. And the way that she chose to utilize color, and I believe that she utilized markers for this as well, It just kind of creates this childlike.
I know, it almost on
Perspective.
first glance looks like a cartoon, like it could be like a cartoon.
Yeah, and all of her art has these bright colors. They're all done in the same style.
And then it sounds like she's most well-known for her work after she was diagnosed with breast cancer.
Yeah, she received, I don't know exactly what the award was, if you know offhand. She received a Lifetime Achievement Award for her art, but it was after she had passed away, and that seemed to be when she received the most recognition for what she had done.
Interesting, thank you.
Other questions? Richard?
Jack, did you read about how iguanas taste? Did you read?
Iguanas? No.
I
I think it's like a really popular dish and they love eating it. So I'm assuming that if it's like only, once like 1 week out of the entire year, I feel like they're like fiending for it. They're like, yeah, I want some iguanas. So they probably taste really good.
Any other questions? I'm not going to let you go. I have other things to say, but I thought I'd give you a chance. And great panelists. Do you have anything to say about other things? The other work? I think these works speak to each other. Across cultures, across times, across interests. This particular image is by Faith Ringgold, who is one of the most significant African-American women poets of the 20th century. And this is called the Sunflower Quilter Society of America. And all of these people are identified as the women who contributed most significantly to civil rights and human rights. And typically when we read the story of the civil rights, it becomes a man's story. And Ringgold, this is a quilt, but her painting, this is a print, something we can afford. We can't afford the other kind of Ringgolds, which are actually quilts with text and image. They're fascinating. Look them up. They're just amazing. But they're with Vincent van Gogh here for reasons we're not quite sure about. This image here is by Leslie Dill. And you got to come up close afterwards to take a look at it. It's not a painting, it's a sculpture or a collage, and it's made with tissue paper, and it's a lithograph, and the words say that dust is the only answer, which is the first line of a poem by Emily Dickinson, which I will read you. And I'll give you a copy so that you can send it to all your friends. It's number 153 among her 1,800 poems. Dust is the only secret. Death, the only one you cannot find all about in his quote-unquote native town. Nobody knows his father, never was a boy, hadn't any playmates or early history. Industrious, laconic, punctual, sedate, bold as a brigand, stiller than a fleet. Builds like a bird, too. Christ robs the nest. Robin after robin, smuggled to rest. It's a strange poem. Dickinson, more than any other poet in English, dwells upon death, sometimes makes jokes about death. Here, she's made Christ into a robber and death as some sort of nest builder. But if you come and look at this, there's also horsehair here. And one of my students pointed out once, well, tissue paper, it's very fragile, and this is a fragile person. And yet, this is tissue too. Hair is living tissue. It's horsehair, and it's been dyed blue. I have no reason to know why. But Leslie Dill works often with words, and as does Faith Ringgold. There's a lithograph over there on the wall that you can look at when you leave, and it's by, could you read me the name, please?
Fatima
Ronquillo.
Ronquillo.
Fatima Ronquillo was born in the Philippines, grew up in the San Antonio area, and is a painter who does all kinds of crazy stuff. That's a beautiful little girl, and the title is My First Jasmines. And that, too, is inspired by a poem. And I will read that one to you as well. But it's by the Indian poet Tagore. The first jasmines. And one of the reasons I love that image, and it's been sitting there all this time and I didn't take any notice of it. But it's of all these images of girls and women, it's the most innocent. Jasmine, by the way, is the national flower of the Philippines. And it's worn at weddings and so on and so forth. Ah, these jasmines, these white jasmines. I seem to remember the first day when I filled my hands with these jasmines, these white jasmines. I have loved the sunlight, the sky, and the green earth. I have heard the liquid murmur of the river through the darkness of midnight. Autumn sunsets have come to me at the bend of the road in the lonely waste, like a bride raising her veil to accept her lover. Yet my memory is still sweet with the first white jasmines that I held in my hand when I was a child. Many a glad day has come in my life, and I have laughed with merrymakers on festival nights. On gray mornings of rain, I have crooned many an idle song. I have worn round my neck the evening wreath of the bakulas woven by the hand of love. Yet my heart is sweet with the memory of the first fresh jasmines that filled my hands when I was a child. Isn't that gorgeous? Aren't they wonderful? Our students. We women. Women today. And it's great that you're here. You know, if you go into that room, there are no women artists. When you go into that room in the 20th century, there's 4 or 5 significant women artists, especially Georgia O'Keeffe, of course. And when you come in here, well, Filipino-American, Korean-American, 2 women who taught at the Art Institute. So this is something that this museum records, that more and more, there's more diversity in our population producing great art. It's always been producing great art, but now we're recognizing it. And women artists are more and more prevalent and, in fact, dominant. So here's to VU women and to women artists and to the Brauer Museum, and thanks for coming. And